So they're coming from other grad programs. And I also kind of organize our education for individuals within our branch. So the way that our program works or our NIH works, we have branches, and then within the branch, we have different groups, which we can call them labs. So I am part of the section on development and affective neuroscience, and essentially our group really uses neuroimaging and different kind of biobases to look at information processing in the brain and how it differs in kids, adolescents, and adults who have clinical anxiety versus not. So my position is in what's called the intramural program. So I do a little bit of research. I do a lot of training and mentorship we have undergraduates and then postdocs who are here doing their training. So it is science-based in that sense, but then I also do a lot of dissemination work in the community where I give talks talking about mental health, just increasing awareness and for recruitment purposes. And then I also work with the National Organization Nonprofit Anxiety and Depression Association of America, where I'm a board member for that organization, and that's also focused on just mental health awareness, treatment, training, education. So yeah, I'm still in the realm of kind of doing my PhD work. I'm not quite in an academic environment. It's similar in a lot of different ways, but it is a government position, which we can talk more about. So that's a lot about my, I guess, like professional background. Yeah.
Vidya, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Hi. I am not on the East Coast, so it's earlier for me. That's what Dr. Lewis was alluding to. It's about five. It's 5 o'clock here. I'm in Chicago, in the Chicago area. So my name is Dr. Vidya Subkumaran, and I am the Vice President of Terminology and Data Engineering at IMO Health, which is a medical software company, essentially. So in my role, I am in charge of the foundational terminology and product packaging that our company builds. So at my company, we're basically a data quality company. We work with EHRs, life science companies, insurance companies, etc. Depending on their use case that we build them, we work with their data and kind of help build these packages that they can use at the point of care, or they can come to us and standardize medical data. I think one way to kind of think about it is when you kind of go as an example of one of our products, if you go to the doctor's office and they start typing into the computer, they're typing in your diagnosis. Sometimes they're typing in an unstructured text. Sometimes they're actually pulling up your actual diagnosis or procedure. And then it gets tied to these things you see kind of, you might get a form from the doctor after, and you have all these like random things that say SNOMED, CPT, or ICD, whatever it may be. You have all these random kind of codes. My department actually manages all of that. We build the terminology. And then we also make sure that all of those appropriate codes get applied to the terminology. That terminology is actually what gets sent out to your insurance companies for billing purposes. So we help in reimbursement, et cetera. That's kind of a very high level lay way to think of what we do. So that's kind of functionally what my department does. We build all of that. We curate, maintain all of that terminology and coding, as well as the pipelines into our product packaging, and package that up and send that up to our customers. In terms of my academic background, I was also at Virginia Tech. That's actually where Dr. Lewis and I met years and years ago. I finished a couple years before her. I finished my PhD in biochemistry in 2010, and then worked my way into academia. I did a postdoc at Johns Hopkins Medicine in the research fellowship program in cardiology. And then I actually did a research associate position at Loyola, and then I made the jump to industry after a few years as an academic postdoc and a research associate. It's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Thank you. That was fascinating. And that kind of leads us like into our kind of first question, which is, when did you realize that a position in the academy was not in your future?
For me, it was after postdocing. So when I finished my PhD, I think I was still very much on the academic route, wanting to do the professor thing, have my own research lab. I think at Johns Hopkins, I think some context here is I also came out of my PhD around the time, like right at 2008 academic downfall, 2010s when I graduated. So like funding was kind of tight. That's when you started to see people kind of scrambling for grants, and I started to kind of realize, oh, okay, maybe this is not the right route. Tried again at Loyola, kind of extended into Loyola. And I think for me, the final kind of tipping point was related to grants. I wrote a very comprehensive grant. The reviews were the best I'd ever had in my academic career as a scientist, and they still didn't give me the money. So at that point, I kind of made a turning point that if I can get reviews like this, still not get funded, work this hard, for me, it became a question mark of was I happy? And at the end of the day, I wasn't that happy repeating the same experiment over and over again and writing grants. I don't enjoy writing grants. I write them out of necessity. So it became kind of a look inside and think more about what's actually making me happy. Am I chasing the ivory tower because that's what I've been chasing versus I'm chasing the ivory tower because this is what's really making me happy. And I realized it wasn't really making me happy. While I enjoyed the work itself, running the same experiment every day, writing grants and chasing those dollars was not fulfilling me in the way I had hoped it would when I had started my academic journey.
What about for you, Crystal?
Yeah, no, I mean, I know the story there. I think, interestingly enough, I realized during my graduate school years that I really wasn't built for the PI life as a R01, submission type of researcher. And so I knew earlier on that I didn't want to go that route. However, I was still focused on being in academic medicine. So I thought that I would end up as a professor, at a training hospital, something to that effect. I was more clinical in nature. So at the time, Virginia Tech, the psychology PhD program wasn't a clinical science program yet, but operated as such. And all that means is that they were much more focused on research and writing grants and all that. And my lab was a very high performing lab where my PI was kind of, accepting students who wanted that life, which I thought was me. But then several years into it, I realized I don't think, I knew my skill set. I knew that I wasn't great at writing. I didn't like writing grants, papers. And I had no desire to develop that skill. And so it really, like I said, I left in 2012 for my clinical internship, which we do a 1 year clinical internship. So I was at the Children's Hospital in Chicago at Northwestern. And I really loved that experience. I stayed for postdoc. And then it was at that point where I was offered a job, but I went into kind of this existential crisis of, but I'm coming from a research PhD program and I need to be doing research. So it was at that point I decided to accept another fellowship and not accept the job and do another fellowship. So I jumped over to UIC in Chicago, University of Illinois, Chicago. And, for a variety of reasons, that postdoc didn't work out. It was advertised as something different than what it was. But for me, I just wasn't ready to accept that I wasn't going to be in the academia and like, oh, I could just be a psychologist within the children's hospital, which probably would have been gratifying for me, but I was just scared. So it really didn't happen for me until later on. So after my second fellowship, then I was looking at positions. I applied at University of Chicago, Emory, all these different schools. I did some R2, like research to schools for teaching, and it just didn't sit right with me. I felt like I was forcing something that wasn't quite what I wanted, but I also wasn't sure what I wanted. And so I accepted a verbal offer, I guess, to Emory University, and I was going to work there, and kind of it went all the way up to the provost. They flew me down twice, did all that stuff, and for whatever reason, it kind of fell through. And so they decided they wanted a more senior person. This was right out of my fellowship. And then my PI my mentor in grad school ended up saying, like, he sent me an email and he was just like, hey, Crystal, have you seen this position? It looks just like you. And so I read it, and it essentially was for a psychologist position, the position I sit in right now, but with a research team, but kind of focused on the clinical work. And so it's more so you're doing your clinical work, but you're with a research team. You still get to publish, and it kind of mirrors what you would do in an academic setting, but it was with the government. And so I had never considered, I didn't know they had positions like this at NIH for psychologists who weren't tenure track or weren't doing research. And so I took the position here, loved it, was able to kind of do many different things, but after a few years, I kind of hit that wall again of like, it was kind of year 3, 4 of like, okay, this doesn't feel quite like what I should be doing. What's the next step? I should be on tenure track. I'm waiting for what's next. And so it really wasn't until like after that point, so I would say 4 years in here, where I had to kind of settle into this is the position that I'm fulfilled in for the most part. I can do so many different things and it's great. It's not a tenure track academic position. It's not, it could be a tenure track position here, but I also didn't want that. And so I think it took me years to get to the point of now where I'm like, okay, that's okay. There is no next step. This is my job. This is what it is. I enjoy what I'm doing. I have all these different opportunities. I could still work with trainees, but it's not in an academic setting. Um, so for me, again, like I knew it earlier on in grad school, but it took some time to accept that and go and get to this point. And had I kind of been okay with it earlier on, I think about like, would I be somewhere else? Would I be doing something different? I don't know. But it did, I think it took some time. And again, even when I started my position here, every year I still go to conferences and do all that. So I'm with my colleagues, I'm with my, I would see my mentor year after year. And it's kind of like, all right, so what's next? Hey, there's this academic position here, there's a faculty position here. And that was kind of still being pushed on me of like, okay, when are you leaving to take this faculty position? And so that didn't really feel good either, but I had to get to the point where I was like, okay, I'm enjoying what I'm doing and I think I'm good in this position. So that's a long-winded answer of saying like I realized earlier on, but really didn't accept it until kind of years into this position, where I'm okay with where I am and it's not an academic position and I'm fine
I
with
think that's
that.
a parallel between the two of
Training.
us. Even when I realized it wasn't, I still took me a few years before I was
Yeah.
as well. We've been friends
Right.
for a long time, so you might hear some parallels.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like going off of what you said, do you feel like there was like a grieving process that you almost had to go through? And it doesn't have to be literal grieving, but almost like grieving the idea of this preconceived notion that PhD doctoral studies means, going into the academy versus like, sometimes with master students, you're focused on like more practitioner, like you're practicing, you're going to go in and be XYZ, go into industry, right? Um, what are your thoughts around that?
I think for me, definitely there was, but it was a little bit different because I went completely out of my field. So I'm a biochemist with a specialty in cardiac membrane biophysics. So like I was a hardcore biophysicist. I was going to biophysics. I mean, I didn't let go of owning, even after I left the academy, I was still paying out of pocket for my biophysical society membership for several years and was on panels and things like that and doing stuff for because I hadn't let it go. So I think for me, there was a grieving process, and partially because at the time when I first left, I felt like I wasn't using my skills that I had gained as a PhD. That's that's BS. I do use my skills every day, just in a different way. But at that time, I was still navigating how I was going to use those skills, what those skills meant, and what they meant for my career. And quite frankly, I think I grew very quickly and I got to where I am very quick, faster than the average because of those skills I had. But it took me a while to get there and see that. So I was grieving not being in the lab, not being called a scientist, because I loved being called a scientist too. Like I liked saying I'm a biophysicist, I'm a biochemist. I loved saying that. But so just like more surface level, I think maybe surface kind of things for me where I grieved. I didn't grieve not writing grants anymore. I didn't grieve not having to go to the lab and check on my mice or check on my cells. Like those I was happy to to get away from, but I did grieve. Would anyone see me as a doctor that I had worked so hard to become? Would I ever be seen as an expert again? Those are the types of things that kind of affected me, and I grieved. And the answer is yes to all of those. People do see me as a doc. I do get called Dr. Vidyasav when appropriate. People do see me as an expert. People, that didn't get erased with me moving into a completely different field. My field is clinical informatics now. So like completely different field, but it took me a while to get there.
Yeah, I hear you. Crystal, do you have any
Hmm.
thoughts around that?
Yeah. I mean, I like that question. I don't. know that I had to grieve anything, because I think unlike video, like I'm still in my, I'm still in the area and using my skill set, everything I did in grad school. So I'm still seeing my patients. I still write papers. Well, very slowly, but I still write papers. I'm still involved in the research. So I'm kind of doing all of that. And I didn't have in mind my endpoint was, like I said, oh, to be a RO1 researcher or to be a faculty member. So for me, it was more just meandering, trying to figure out what I wanted it to look like, as opposed to I had that idea and then I had to grieve that because I'm not in academia. I think I dealt more with just the frustration of others pushing that on me. So when I would go to conferences, it's kind of like, yeah, this is great. You're in that environment, but you're still not a faculty member, right? You're still not tenure track. When do you become tenure track? I don't want to be tenure track, right? So it wasn't I was grieving it. It's just that it was more like accepting that that was okay that I didn't want that, and then finding exactly what I wanted my position to look like. I mean, processes. I think about this because when I first started, I started in this position at NIH, and then I was like, you know what? But it's not, I feel far removed from academia because I don't have students. So then I also took an adjunct position at Catholic University so I could have my PhD practicum students, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm going to do that. And then it's like, oh, but now I'm not practicing, right? So let me start my private practice. And so then I was doing private practice, and I ended up with 4 jobs, and it's just like I burnt myself out very quickly. But I felt like I needed to kind of mirror what I would be doing as a faculty member and doing the service work and doing, the teaching and doing the practice. So again, I think it was just me creating what I thought I wanted and making sure that I was doing things I was passionate about, but I wasn't quite grieving like not being in academia in that sense.
Yeah, and I think there's an added layer of context there. When Crystal and I came out of grad school, things like programs like this didn't exist. Actually, this is one
Yeah.
of the things we talked to Teresa about when we met over the summer, is that there wasn't a lot for grad students when we were grad students at Virginia Tech. It was all about the undergrads. And so we had to find our own
Hmm.
people, and it was not emphasized going into other careers. It was all academia. That's all we saw. And I know like Virginia Tech's actively made, I've come back like 4 times now. This is probably my fourth time doing some version of this with Virginia Tech specifically, let alone other schools. So it's the environment's changing. So
Hmm.
just also providing a layer of context for kind of what Crystal and I are describing and what we went through with the difficulties and why we were grieving or in denial, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, going through that process, how would you feel that you were supported or not supported through it, right? And kind of think about specifically from your advisor, family and friends, but sometimes as I supported my husband through his PhD, like sometimes his advisor wasn't as supportive when he decided to make a pivot. And so sometimes there's some of those kind of like push and pull. How did y'all navigate that? What was your experience surrounding that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of alluded to this a little bit. I think I had an amazing advisor, right? I really don't have many complaints about my experience, especially as I talk to other grad students and then my friends during that time and their experience with their advisor. But I think on the whole, like I would get feedback from my program because it's like, well, you're at this second year, you should be preparing a grant, you should be submitting this paper. So I don't think during that process, like I was supported in the way where it's like, well, there are many different paths I could take. It's not just on the track to be like a researcher. And so I think it was hard because I don't feel like I was like not supported. I would just get that feedback of you're a little too clinical. You should be focusing on this or that. And I do think that being pushed in that way was advantageous because then I was in a position to actually do many different positions. But like I said, it was hard because then as I'm going to these conferences and all of my colleagues from my lab, right, and people I know from grad school are in faculty positions, tenure track positions, I would kind of get okay, well, yeah, Crystal's doing this. That's wonderful. But it's just like, oh, here's a position at this university. Here's a position. And then it's kind of like, I'm not going anywhere. I enjoy what I do, but it was still being pushed on me like, but you could be doing this as though being a tenure track faculty person was better than what I was currently doing. Um, yeah, so I mean, I don't see that as not being supported per se, but I guess you could look at it that way. But I think that was probably just the most challenging thing for me, was accepting that my position was just as good, right, as these other positions in academia as faculty members. So I think as far as receiving support, friends, family that aren't in the field or don't have PhDs, most of my family had no idea what I was doing anyway, besides like, oh, you see kids. So they were just as supportive as they could be throughout the process. As long as you have a job, you're happy. Like, they didn't really push one way or another. I don't think they really understood it as much, but this is where it's great to, Avidit and I are friends, to be able to talk this through with people who can understand the experience, and we can support one another. So I did have support in that way.
Yeah, I'd say my answer is pretty similar. It wasn't like I was pushed away or told that industry was a bad idea, but there wasn't any real support to go into industry, especially considering I figured it out way later, as well. So in my case, I think there was some support, like in the way that Crystal was describing it, but it wasn't like no one was like going out of their way to kind of help me figure it out. Especially in my case, like I think in Crystal, it kind of sounds like in your case like there was at least a little bit of you wanted all the things, but you had at least had a direction. I didn't have any direction when I left because I was like, I did not want at the time, I did not want to even go into pharma, which would have been like the most direct industry path for me would be drug discovery, pharma, et cetera. And I at that time I was going through a different kind of existential crisis. There was a thing about the CEO taking all this money and the EpiPen, and I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. It's selling out. I went through a phase. um, so for some reason, I did not want to touch pharma. I was like, I'm done with the lab. I'm done. I mean, I don't fully remember exactly what my reasons are. I do remember something about the EpiPen and how some trials and tribulations with that. So I went through an existential crisis around just like, what is it? So like, there wasn't a lot of support, and my family also, I'm one of few PhDs in my family, probably the only, maybe there's one other in my family, so not a lot of support there in the sense of people knowing what I do for a living. I mean, my mother was still sending me academic job listings until I hit like senior director, a senior director title. So even from that standpoint, being South Asian, academia is kind of seen at a certain, the ivory tower is a certain level of pedestal just within the culture itself. So I kind of had that pressure as well. So I would say there was support, but not the kind that like helped me necessarily get to where I am, if that makes sense. Again, kind of you have friends that are going through the same type of thing, you lean on them. Lean on therapists where you need it. Chris is a psychologist. It's good to have a friend that's a psychologist.
Yeah, it's kind of like the budget therapist
Yeah,
situation, but you do it over drinks and or whatever,
exactly.
whatever.
Right.
I'm just assuming a lot of things. Before I start asking, I do want to address there was a question in the chat, and I think it kind of relates a little bit to what we've been discussing, which is, did the decision of leaving academia have any influence from not enjoying teaching as well? And I think maybe Crystal, like you talked about adjuncting and such.
Mhm.
I'm I'm hoping that make the question kind of
Did the decision of leaving academia have any influence from not enjoying teaching? Oh, I think, well, I say personally for me, not necessarily. I did not like teaching. I didn't love it, but it also for me, it was kind of like I would have done it. And it for me, teaching a different way because I am clinical. So my teaching was more practicum based classes where I'm teaching therapy, which I really enjoyed. And so I didn't like if I were in academia, I would have been teaching, my developmental psych classes, grad level classes, which I was fine with, but it wasn't primary for me in terms of what I really wanted to do. So, in terms of leaving academia, it didn't, yeah, like it didn't push me away from it, but I also was not like, oh my gosh, I really miss that. I'm able to integrate that into my current position. And so, like I said, we have a lot of college graduates who come to us to work for 2 years as they decide to go into medical school and their PhD programs. And that for me, there's a lot of teaching there just in terms of clinical research skills, all the mentoring and teaching we do. So it satisfies my need in that way. It's a different type of teaching, right? But it's still teaching, I think.
Yeah, same for me. I don't do traditional teaching, but there's teaching in my job. Basically, every day I'm teaching, doing some kind of form of teaching. And I was a teacher, so it's in my DNA. I was a teacher before I even went to grad school. So, and my family, I've come from a family of teachers, so it's just kind of in my DNA. So it didn't push me away from it. I just kind of don't do it in the traditional sense
yeah.
now.
So Vidya, you mentioned like, your PhD is far removed from what you do now, how do you leverage your degree in your current work? Because you've gone through a lot. It takes a lot, right? It's a big marathon, to earn your doctorate degree. Um, how do you feel like you used it? Like, it also kind of rectifying maybe in your own mind, like, hey, I belong here. I can do the job and those sorts of things, but more like leveraging your degree in your current work.
Yeah, so I think there's two aspects, right? There's the skills that you learn as a PhD, and then there's your actual specialty. One advantage I have at my company is we're a medical company. So I'm a biomedical scientist. So there's medicine in there. And that was one of the things that drew me to the company in the first place. Um, we're clinical informatics. We do clinical informatics or biomedical informatics at my company. That's mainly what our expertise. I did bioinformatics, which is a different field, but they're connected. So it was finding those parallels between what I did do in my PhD in terms of like the actual um, study or the actual subject areas in my current day-to-day job and then applying my skill sets on top of that. So when I came to my company, I actually came in, I was lost. I came in entry level. I went all the way to the bottom, was like, all right, I don't know what I want to do. I'm going to go find a job. This job involves medical terminology. I know medical terminology. I can teach at a medical school. That's what I'm qualified to do. Let's go and try this. Went in entry level, and then I started to find the parallels and started developing my skills at the company and then paralleling those to my skills as a PhD. So problem solving is going to come up in every job. That's what a PhD does. We're taught to problem solve. Learning, we are we are advanced learners as PhDs, right? That's basically our core skill. We know how to learn. Um, Developing expertise, again, core skill. Um, Leadership, whether we realize it or not, we're doing leadership every day when we're working in our lab or doing that, working with children, patients, whatever. We are using a leadership skill every day. It's just recognizing that we have that skill. So it's figuring out what skills were applicable from there into industry. And for me, it turned out like, and not for me, for all of us, actually, every skill that we learn as a PhD is applicable to industry. It's just learning how to use that in a different context. So like I said, I'm problem solving every day. I am we're building systems at my company, system designs and operations. A lab is an operation. I'm in operations at my company. The whole lab, your whole experimental plan is an operations plan, right? Like I said, problem solving, the leadership. I run a department of, upwards of 40 something people, soon to be maybe potentially more. I've had up to 80 people in my department. We don't necessarily work with that many people in a lab, but you have undergrads, you have undergrads, you have high school students coming in, you have other grad students. You're leading them, right? So applying those skills as a leader. So I think at the end of the day, it was really finding those parallels between my skills and learning how to utilize them and market them because I came in again entry level and I've worked my way up, learning how to market those skills, but also paralleling the subject areas that we have. So while while I did bioinformatics in the lab, we do biomedical informatics. There's a connection point between those two things. And our company has expanded since I joined. We actually do work in the life science space now. So now I can go in and be in those conversations from a strategic standpoint. And then the strategy, that's a big part of my job every day. What we're doing as PhDs is strategizing and developing new knowledge. Once you develop new knowledge, to be honest, that's our whole role as a PhD. Everything else kind of falls into place. Everything else is like, oh, someone else has already done it. Now you just have to learn how to research it.
Yeah,
That
I
was a
mean,
lot of answer.
I think that's a great point because we focus so much in the program on our specialty area, what we want to become an expert in, right? The content that and especially for us, maybe it's a little different now with the training that students get, but you fail to realize the skill sets that you're developing are applicable to these different fields. And so along with that, you think about, you're doing your presentations, you're going to conferences, the communication, science communication and presentation skills, those go a long way, right? And so your data analysis that you have to do, project management, leadership, as she mentioned, like all of these things you can apply in these different areas, but that's not really highlighted. For us, it's just I'm clinical psychology, right? I'm anxiety, I'm exposure, this is my skill set and I'm focused on that, but think about all that went into your program over the years, all the skills that you've learned, what you enjoy doing, what your strengths are. That can be applied to many different areas. You just have to kind of have the advocacy that, oh, I can teach myself or I can learn this, which clearly we've made it through. You're making it through these PhD programs, you can learn. So that's just important to keep in mind.
Yeah, so that's fantastic answers, and I appreciate your insights and thoughts on those. Just to clarify, when we talk about academia, and I made a lot of assumptions, and I probably shouldn't. So when we talk about the academy, when we're talking about academic positions, we're talking about like tenure track jobs, becoming a professor, teaching at an R1, you're doing research and teaching. Sometimes folks will go into more teaching roles and like developing pedagogy for teaching subject matter, things like that. So when we're talking about the academy, we're talking about like being in a university setting or being in higher education and where you're teaching, right? Another question in the chat was, do are you all still publishing, right? Are you still writing? Are you still contributing to the academy as far as research goes or things like that?
So I
Okay.
have not actively kept up with publishing papers. That does not mean you can't. I'm actually working potentially on a paper now with one of my coworkers. Others have published at my company, so there is opportunity to publish when you work in industry. It's just kind of whether it's what you focus on. It wasn't my focus until maybe now recently. I'm starting to focus back on it a little bit more. So that's in my case, I just didn't focus on it as much, but there are opportunities if you look for them.
Yeah, I think similarly here because I am in a staff clinician non-tenure track position, I don't have to worry about publishing, but because I do like collaborative research, like I'll publish with my lab. And then I'm working on a couple of first author publications now, but I said slowly before, there's no pressure to do it. And it's, add it and it's additional work that I'm doing. And so because I enjoy it, I keep up with it. I don't have to do it, but I am able to publish. We have a lot of trainees as well, so it's really just kind of working with them as they're submitting their posters, and then if we want to turn that into a paper. But again, I'm as it's a government worker, I don't have to, but I can, and so that's a variation where if I'm in a tenure track position in academia, right, part of your tenure, you have to publish. So it's nice to not have that pressure, but to be able to still publish in any form. It could be research article, but it could also you can write a book, you can write articles online, just any type of communication. Technically, that's contributing, I think. So that's important. You use their
Yeah.
writing skills. Right.
Yeah, I'll just echo that as a throw in. I know moderating, but I just got I just had a research paper accepted. So I published my first author. And so I got that going. I
Oh,
got a book
congrats.
chapter going.
Yeah.
So you can still do it as a professional, like, because technically,
Mhm.
even though my setting is higher ed, I'm an administrator. So I do more, you would call it industry work, rather than teaching. But yeah, you definitely do it. I definitely can do that. And I can't imagine anyone else not doing it. Um, Next question is, and it's kind of a doozy, so kind of thinking about it, and I'll put the questions in the chat, and there's multiple questions. So what would be your advice to graduate students who are planning to be in the market soon, right? We're climbing through, we're starting to get through an academic year, right? We're getting through our fall semester here, and their students are planning to look for kind of jobs as they graduate in May. So what's your advice for graduate students who are planning to be in the market soon? And then on the flip side, what's your advice to students who are still early on in their program? And in that, what would you tell your former self knowing what you know now as you navigated your program? So let's do the first one. What's your advice to graduate students who are planning to be in the market soon?
Thinking.
Yeah.
Take a minute. That's all good.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things to advise, right? But I think it's important that you follow your passion, what you're passionate about and your desire to be in a certain position and think about like do you think about your why you're doing something because it is very competitive to get these jobs and you really want to make sure it's worthwhile. And so I think it's important to get advice, talk to your support team, your advisor, people that you know who already have these positions, but ultimately just leaning on your intuitive nature. Like, I don't think it will fail you. And you know, to some degree, you know, kind of what position, what type of position you want. And it might not feel good to be going in a direction that's different than anticipated. You worked all these years up to a certain point, but if it's really what you want, then I would say kind of lean towards that versus going after what you think you should be doing, because ultimately your happiness will come a lot quicker when you are operating, you know, in the area you're supposed to be in. Um, I mean, I guess this answers for the other one, but yeah, so those who are at the point of figuring out what's next and being on the market, a lot of it is, again, just about talking to people. Make sure you have a lot of information about what these positions look like and whether you see yourself, whether you think you can be happy in these types of positions. So reach out and talk to people and get information on what these positions look like. Um, I mean, that's where I would start, I think, with the advice.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that too. The networking aspect is kind of twofold, right? Networking can get you your foot in the door, but it also gives you an idea of what you're walking into as well. I don't think I did a lot of networking or enough networking. I don't think it's my strength, kind of cold calling and or even just walking up to someone at a conference. But I would recommend definitely networking, and then, like Crystal said, learning more about the roles that you're interested in. I think just being okay with doing something different is a big thing. A big thing. And I don't know how different it is now compared to when we were graduating, where everyone was kind of going or being pushed into the academy. And now, again, it's a little bit, maybe hopefully a little bit different now. Um, and the other side of that is kind of start thinking about this is a little bit more on the process side, but think about your resume rather than your CV. We're built to write CVs in academia. Focus on your resume and figure out how to kind of put your key achievements in your resume. So, um, and what you would like in terms of like a metric or something like that. CVs again are multiple pages. No one's going to read a multi-page, or it's very rare for a company to read a multi-page CV. They're going to want a one pager, maybe two pager max.
Yeah, I would say another thing that stands out for me is keeping in mind that this will not be the position you retire. And it's very unlikely that your first position is your last position. And I think that was definitely a blocking belief for me early on. It was like, I have to pick the perfect position, right? It has to be right. I didn't really even know what I wanted, but having that mindset of, okay, once I commit to this, that's it. And generally, you know, for academia, you do hop to a different university, but still along it's the same academics, right? But knowing that even if you start in a tenure track position or start in a non-tenured position, you can make the jump back and forth. You can leave, you can go to industry, you can try this job, but just keeping in mind, like, or saying, don't be afraid to pivot. Where you start is not where you have to end. And you probably shouldn't end, honestly, in terms of in that same position, because you're looking for growth, you're looking for excitement, you're looking to build. So I think it's just important to like keep in mind that don't be afraid to try something and don't be afraid to pivot. And so even if you apply to something and change your mind, that is perfectly okay. And that's probably something that got me in terms of the anxiety, was just like, it's putting all my marbles in one bat. Like, this is it. This is what I work so hard for. And it's not that serious. It's just like, yeah, it's great if you end up in a position you love, but even if you don't, you're getting the experience, you're learning more, you know, using your skills, and then you can transition to something else.
Yeah, I think,
So, go ahead. Sorry,
oh,
sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to transition to the flip side of that question,
Mhm.
which is for because there's a wide variety of different folks in the room, so they may not all be getting ready to graduate. So you might have some who are maybe first or second year PhD students, or even first year master students, and so your advice to students who are early on in their program, right? So on the opposite end, right? They're just starting. Or what would you tell your former self, knowing what you know now, as you navigate through your doctoral program or master's program?
I'd say to kind of develop relationships, even outside of your advisor. So like meet with other professors to kind of get their so when I was a student, I had my advisor as well as my department chair that I kind of talked to a lot, but I also talked to Dr. Smith over in a completely different department. He runs the prep program. He runs prep. He ran prep back then when I was a student. He still runs prep. Um, so that you can learn a little bit more and meet other people, and kind of that'll also help you kind of guide your intuition and gut, because you'll be talking to other students, other people that are talking about what they're looking for and what they're trying to do. Kind of widens your variety of interactions, and kind of helps guide where your own intuition to take you. I don't think I did that until like mid to later in my PhD. I think at my first 2 years, I was just studying and focused. I was around my biochemistry cohort, but I wasn't really out there meeting others. I think I met Crystal. I think I met you in my second year, probably, give or take,
Yeah,
second
I
or
think so. Hmm.
something like that, because she was a couple years behind me. We became good friends. And then, like I said, talking to other professors and talking to others, just kind of to learn more about what's out there, because if you might not get that support from your advisor, but at least there's another professor around that might be able to help you, or another student, or another administrator like Teresa that can help kind of guide you. If you build up and open up those networks, not only do you have that guiding, those paths to help, those people to help guide your path, but you also just open up avenues of conversation that you didn't realize maybe you needed or were ever going to have. I don't think I did that pretty late in my career, my academic career, I think.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that's really important to kind of just build a community, build your network. It might not be people you're directly working with. Go outside of your department and just kind of get as much information and meet many people. And you'll never know when you might refer back to that person for something. So I do think that's really important. I would also say during the earlier years, as you're going through your grad program, really just don't shy away from the challenges, right? It's cliche to say, but like don't only do what you're good at, because it can be you're in a competitive environment. You want to shine amongst your cohort, right? You want to really get your publications, do things that kind of help you move along. But I would say, as part of the learning process, is it's important that you do things that scare you. It's important that you do different things. You figure out what you're good at and what you're not good at. This is the time to do that over these next years. You have an advisor or a mentor who's going to guide you along to make sure you get your degree. You're not going to fail. But it is important to figure out, the things that you are failing at. If that's something, maybe you really enjoy it and you want to develop that skill, this is the time to be able to do it. And it helps you to pivot. So when you do get to the point of, I'm going to do this postdoc or that postdoc, now you have that experience, which helps you to get more competitive postdocs, as opposed to just staying in your lane of what you're good at, but then you really don't like what you're doing. That's okay. So I think it's just kind of knowing that this is the time to like do hard things, do things that this is not my area at all, right? But I think it might bring me some joy. I really like this. Okay, let's develop that skill. If it takes you an extra, right? If it takes you an extra year or two, that's okay. Not ideal for everyone, but that's okay. Like my dissertation kept me at Tech for an extra year, but I knew that I really wanted to be in the prevention space, working with little kids and doing my work, in the schools. And so that was a trade-off of like, well, I'm going to, I don't have full support for this. I'm going to figure out where I can get it and develop the skill set, because ultimately I thought I'd be using that in the future. But it also brought me a lot of joy. I loved working with the little kids. So I think it's just kind of knowing that this is a space to do that and figure out kind of where your passion lies, what you want to do. You're in a safe space to be, hopefully most of you are in a safe space to be supported and to do that right now.
Right. And just to kind of co-sign on that, I think the one part to like, I want to like just really push on is this is the time to do it.
Mhm.
Not saying that you can't do it later, but you are in an environment that's meant for you to fail a little bit. I mean, some of us are scientists, some of us, I mean, we're doing experiments, whatever your field is, right? And experiments are meant to fail sometimes, and that's okay. As an example, and I have this conversation all the time with people, even to this day, in my current job, just talking about failure is okay. What do we just do if we failed, if we made a mistake? We just go and we fix it and then we move on, right? And finding that skill set. So like this really is the time to, use this time to figure that out, because I think, some of us figured out way later.
Yeah.
Really,
And
yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead,
oh
Crystal.
no, sorry. I was just gonna take it a little bit away from the whole professional kind of development. I think for me, what I would have told my younger self and what I would have done a little differently is focused more on just kind of, I think personal development and kind of social and emotional health, and really just focusing in on enjoying the process. I did enjoy my time at Tech, but I felt it was very focused on academics and my classes. And of course, I had fun, I had friends, and I hung out, right? But I think I really could have done much more during those years that I just wasn't focused on, because I'm like, well, I'm here for school and this is what I'm doing. But your life is, once you get started and have your position, you're working until you retire. Like, there's so many more years ahead of you. There's no need to kind of try to rush through it or just only focus on your PhD. I say this because I look back and I was like, there was this program I wanted to do in Costa Rica, and my advisor was just like, no, you can't do that because I need you in the lab over the summer. And I probably could have advocated for myself to be able to make it happen, but it was kind of like, oh yeah, I'm just here to work. I'm just here to focus on my PhD. So I didn't push for it, but that would have been an amazing experience. So I think just focusing also on how you want to develop as a person and what experiences you want right now, and making sure that happens, because your career is going to be a very long time, whether you want it to be or not. So, so I would say just kind of enjoy the process.
I'm laughing because Crystal and I've had that conversation a few times over the years.
Yeah, no,
We've done differently. And
yeah.
I had forgotten about that conversation until Crystal brought it up. But we've had that
I mean,
conversation.
I think you brought up two very good points. One, it's okay to fail. I think a lot of folks, especially folks who might be folks of color and stuff, and women too, like this fear of failure is kind of
Mhm.
pronounced a lot, of like, oh, we can't fail, right? And so it's okay. Like, to hear that's very validating for folks. And
Mhm.
then also, like, thinking about holistic development, right, as a person throughout your graduate program is, I think, super important as well. There was a question in the chat, and getting some of your thoughts and feelings on this, which is, what is your opinion on job stability in academic versus non-academic jobs? Right now, we're hearing about big layoffs in the tech industry, such as Microsoft, Amazon, Google. So kind of getting your all thoughts as working, outside of the academy and that.
Hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I think it ebbs and flows. I don't, I mean, right now, yeah, I mean, I work in tech. Um, you know, it's based on the economy. I mean, I don't know if it's one thing is better than the other. I graduated when we had like just a couple years after that, the 2008 economic crash, and so I wasn't able to get grant funding very easily. And that was one of the things that pushed me to really kind of look inside and see whether this was the right path. I don't know if one. I mean, there's stability in the tenure track and being tenure specifically, but even that's starting to shift. I mean, tenure track positions are going away. Things are going more towards adjunct positions. I think it's choose your poison, kind of. I mean, for me, I prefer where I'm at now because I maybe, but like I said, I would agree it's not very stable in the tech industry right now. But if you choose if you get into a good company and you showcase your skills and you do a good job and you become, then you're going to be stable, right? And it's the same thing with academia. If you're really good at your job and you can write those grants and get funding, you're going to be stable. So personally, I think it's a choose your poison sort of. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure if I know how to answer that question if I'm honest. I think it ebbs and flows depending on the economy. I mean, right, I mean, think 3 years ago, the tech industry was booming and everyone was remote and everyone was getting, I mean, there were so many jobs out there. My company also was hiring like crazy a couple years ago. We're not hiring as fast anymore, but doesn't mean we're struggling necessarily either.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm going to be more optimistic and say it's kind of like pick your adventure. Either way,
Okay, maybe that's a better way to put
there's
it.
going to be, challenges. And so I'm not minimizing the industry cuts and people. I'm thinking now, actually, someone who would have been good for this panel. But, I have a friend who's in industry and ended up being laid off. and then having to find another job. But again, he had such a strong skill set. It took some time, but he was able to find an even better job, right? And then I have
Right.
a family member, same thing, where I think it was Microsoft. He was laid off and then had to get another job. I think it's higher risk to be in industry, but the benefits in terms of generally you're getting paid a lot more. It's just a little less stable, but you're getting paid a lot more, so you can kind of save up. So when you do have those bumps in the road, you're okay. But then yes, it's a challenge in terms of getting another job. But if you look at academia, right, it is harder to get tenure track positions, and you're not going to get paid as much. I can say that across probably all areas, but and again, and it may not be that fulfilling, right? And so maybe you feel a little safer. I have this tenured position, right? But it's really not filling you in the way that you need it to, whereas an industry job might be able to, or you could start your own business or doing something more with more of a risk. So I wouldn't use that as a limitation to say like, oh, you get laid off in industry, so I don't know if I want to do that. Anything you do, you're going to have kind of these challenges. And so it's best to go in with a mindset of that could happen. It's likely it might happen on either end, right? But have a plan for how you would be prepared for that if it does happen. I'm not, not to minimize it. I know it's stressful, but just kind of thinking through, you can say I'm going to go tenure track because it's safer, but who's to say you're going to be able to get a tenure track job? I have colleagues who, 40, 50, 60 applications is it's a lot trying to get this tenure track position. And it took them, I'm saying maybe 6, 7, 8 years to get that position. Whereas if they were in the industry those years, they'd be making all this money, right? So it's kind of like it really just depends what your
Yeah.
priorities
I
are.
like to choose your adventure better than pick your poison, but same meaning.
Yes.
More
Yeah.
optimistic.
Right. Yeah.
Crystal's the optimistic one. I'm the pessimistic one.
And that's what makes it work, right? Um, I want to open it up for any other students who may want to come off mute or come off camera and want to ask our panelists any questions, can do so. Or you can pop questions in the chat. It's totally cool. I also think about while we wait and think about some of these things, like I think you both kind of touched on this idea of like how like oh well, I think we talked about this. The grad school and the graduate process tends to be a very lonely existence at times. You're in your lab, you're focused on your thing, or even if you have like a lot of coursework, you're focused on doing on your homework, or you're writing your papers and you're doing all of that.
Mhm.
What do you think the benefits of having community are, and having those chances to be able to develop? You two have a very tight relationship
Mhm.
coming out of grad school. That's not typical necessarily. Um,
Especially being in different departments, right?
yeah.
In that sense.
So can you all talk about like your all's relationship and how that may have led to possible success through going through a graduate program or anything like that? I don't know. Did you find your friendship a way to motivate one another to get through hard times, right? It's not easy.
I would hope so. I would hope I was supportive, but yeah, no, I definitely think so. It's helpful to have, some programs, your cohort might be very small. I mean, my cohort had, I think, 8 people, but I had 4 that were directly in my lab doing the same thing I was doing. And so we can kind of relate to one another, but also, I guess, normalize the dysfunction, if that makes sense. So it is very helpful to have people outside of that. And then also develop relationships with, students in different departments like we did, and just friends in general. You need that support, regardless of what level you're at, where you are in your program. Having community really helps the experience. I think like I said, we did socialize. We went to events together. We just hung out together. We'd watch Grey's Anatomy Thursday night. We would do certain things together as just an outlet. And that is really important because grad school is stressful and it can be very lonely and isolating, especially being away from family. And if you are in maybe a family who doesn't quite even understand what you're doing, right? So you can't even get that verbal support when you're talking to them. Developing a community is really important. I think video I already mentioned like the VT prep program, and just kind of through the grad school, we were part of the Black Graduate Student Organization, and they had events, and you're meeting people that way. I think it is important to step outside of your department to get some, not just kind of support, but to hear about experiences in other departments, to hear about other students' experiences, because then you can kind of make a better judgment, I think, about your own experience and what you're lacking or what you might need. And also just, I had friends from home who were teachers and they were starting their lives. I'm still in grad school, right? And they're getting married, having kids. Just talking, I think just getting different perspectives is super helpful.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think our friendship um, helped in that I mean, you had someone to talk to that was going through something similar, but not exactly the same as Crystal was alluding to, different departments, kind of got a different insight. Um, but and there was also just sometimes you just needs to be with someone, even if it's just sitting quietly in your isolated space. So like,
Mhm.
we would sometimes just sit in a room and do our work. We completely different work, but I'd be reading a biochemistry textbook or still be reading a psychology textbook, and we were just in a room together, so we felt less alone and less isolated doing that work. And so it made it a little bit more palpable sometimes because, you know, like you said, grad school can be isolating. And I know I probably went out more because of Crystal dragging me dragging me out. No, she didn't drag me out, but at least telling me what was going um, on campus because my lab wasn't even on campus. I was over at the VCOM campus doing my research, so I wasn't even on the main campus a lot of the time unless I had class. So yeah, even something as simple as that. What's going on campus? Having that friend that tells you what's going on, so you can make plans to do something for yourself and have a little bit of fun and go to the BGSO. We didn't have the Asian and Pacific Islander group back then, at least not that I was aware of, anyways. So at least I got to go to the BGSO events and meet more people and hear about other programs and make more friends as well through that.
Yeah, that's awesome. We do have a question in the chat, and this will probably be the one because I just want to be mindful of your all's time and all of that kind of good stuff. So Alex asks, earlier you had mentioned that we should try to prep for life after academia by centering our focus on a resume rather than a CV. How did you both do this? Do we have to leave academia for these opportunities? Is there a way to do so within the institution if working outside is difficult or impossible? A lot of questions in there, but it's in the chat so you can kind of refer back to it. But yeah, how the idea of a resume versus a CV.
I
I'm
think I
gonna
did a
let
lot of
David
Googling
take
and
this
research.
one. Okay.
Pardon?
No, I said I'll let you take this one. Like I use a CV, and I haven't necessarily needed to convert to a resume for anything. So I have pages and pages on my CV.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever really got good at resume. I can read a resume. I can help other people with their resumes. My own, I don't know. Um, I think I did a lot of Google research on how to put together a good resume. I looked at a lot of examples online. It was basically how I figured out how to write my resume and get some attention. And then I talked to experts like on LinkedIn. You can reach out to a recruiter. Like as I was applying, I would like send my resume to a recruiter, and sometimes they would give me feedback on why my resume didn't come back, why it wasn't accepted, et cetera, why they weren't looking to hire me. So I kind of looked for feedback as well. And then, having that group of friends that is also looking in industry. I had some friends that weren't academics, but, had at least written resumes, et cetera, and got feedback from them. That's how I kind of got better at resume. And now in my position, I look at resumes all the time. So I have a little bit of more of an eye for it now. And then to getting opportunities outside of academia. I actually did do stuff while I was still in academia. So I did write for some blogs here and there. I did actually randomly do like a marketing internship with a small life science lab supply type company where I wrote, that's where I wrote some of the pieces, and then I did some research for them on like women in science and even interviewed some entrepreneurs for them. And then there were some other kind of companies that kind of work with grad students as well. They kind of pull in grad students or postdocs or PhDs. You don't get paid a lot, but you get some consulting experience that way. So I actually kind of looked for things like that, and I did that while I was still in the lab to gain some, just to kind of start to get a feel for what other things are and what I might like, because things are idealistic, right? Like, oh, I want to become a consultant for McKinsey. Maybe I don't actually like consulting. I just like the idea of it. So I started doing a little bit of consulting here and there to see if I liked it. I did enjoy it, but that wasn't necessarily where I wanted to end up at this point in my career. I think maybe later in my career, I'll probably push into consulting a little bit more. But that's an example of what I did. So opportunities do exist outside where you can do things. I think being careful with your graduate school contract, though, because I know back when I signed it, I wasn't supposed to work outside the lab. I don't know if that's still a thing. I don't know how strict it is, but I would just be a little bit cognizant of that as you take on potential paid opportunities. I don't know, like I said, I don't know if that's changed, but find your ways around it is what I did.
Yeah.
But
And
I
I
also
think
did a lot of it more of it in my postdoc than in grad school when I started
right.
some of that stuff where I didn't have that same necessary limitation.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I
I
was
also
gonna
I
say
didn't share too much with my PI when I was in my postdoc, unless I had to. Not because he was necessarily unsupportive, but because then it was taking away from the lab and you should be doing lab work. So I think just kind of being careful with that was kind of would be my advice there. But yeah, they exist.
Crystal,
Just
did
take
you
research and then
thought?
some networking in a lot of cases.
yeah, no, I was just gonna say, yeah, you can definitely have different opportunities even when you're within academia, but it depends on your institution, what your contract says, and then like government is pretty strict. So if you're knowing that you want to consult or do certain things, then maybe a government position wouldn't be for you. Like I'm in the government, I have to report everything I do. So it just depends on who you work for, and how much they allow you. Like they did allow me to teach, they did allow me to do some other things, but I am very limited. I always have to get approval, so it just depends.
Yeah, in my current job, I'm not necessarily limited, but I usually do let someone know if I get an opportunity to do something, if I'm doing a speaking engagement, et cetera. Like usually, at least my boss knows or is aware, just to cover bases. So yeah, it could be limiting depending on where you are, but the opportunities do exist. I see there's another question about looking for
Yeah,
side
I just
positions.
want to ask if it's okay if we answer one more, if y'all are okay to
Yeah.
answer one more question, if that's all right. And the question is, where would you suggest looking for some of these outside positions like consulting that are part-time or flexible to work around the lab? Most things I see online are full-time and would mean I would need to take time away from my lab work to participate.
Twitter. I mean, how I did it was, engaging on Twitter at the time, or I guess it's X now. Um, um, I used to be pretty active or not pretty active. I was more active. I wouldn't say I was pretty active. Depends on but I did find some stuff on Twitter where people would be talking about it. LinkedIn, I thought, some people post things. And then there are those like flexible working websites. Shoot, I'm blanking on the names right now, but shoot. It's going to come to me right when I sign off on this call. But there are a couple of sites where it's more about like bidding on work. Um, so it can, so it's a bit more flexible. So you're bidding on a project rather than like a full-time job. And I don't know why I'm blanking right now on the name of that website, but so LinkedIn and Twitter were things that I used. But like I said, there are websites that do kind of cater to that.
Okay. Yeah. Um, I just wanted to say thank you both for sharing your time and knowledge and all of those amazing things with our students. It's been very thought-provoking, and I think a lot of folks have taken a lot of things away from that, so I really appreciate that. Um, if folks would you be open to having folks contact you if they have more questions afterwards or would like to connect with you? Um, would that be okay? And so if y'all don't mind posting like an email that's good for you all both, that's would work, that would be amazing. So yeah. Use this time, network. They said to network. So here's a great opportunity to network if there's folks that are in your field or adjacent, or if you want to ask more questions. We definitely want to do more programming like this if you enjoyed it. Please let me know. I would love to do more of these things for graduate students. But otherwise, thank you all for attending, and we really appreciate it. Crystal, Vidya, thank you so much. Let me know the next time you are in Blacksburg. I would love to